Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's virtual program, The Hidden Research Funders Are Doing on You with Lauren Steiner. I am Brittany Spillman, and I have the privilege of serving as the Managing Director of the Carey Center's Community and Collegiate Programs. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors who make programs like this possible. Our presenting sponsor for today is the Walker Area Community Foundation, a nonprofit grant-making organization that works every day to build permanent resources, spark meaningful conversations, inspire action, and empower partners to make a difference. We are so grateful to our community and collegiate program sponsors, Auburn University Outreach, the Kim and Tim Hudson Endowed Fund for Excellence, Auburn University Outreach Office of Public Service, the Drummond Thorne Stooks Endowed Fund for Excellence, and a community service grant made possible by State Representative Joe Lovern. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Lauren Steiner is the founder and CEO of Grants Plus, a national grant strategy and consulting firm serving nonprofit organizations since 2007. With over 2 decades of practitioner experience, she advises organizations on institutional fundraising strategy, funder cultivation, and building grant programs that reflect both mission clarity and organizational credibility. Lauren serves on the Giving USA editorial review board and is a recognized voice on grant seeking trends, foundation giving, and the growing influence of artificial intelligence in nonprofit institutional fundraising. Please join me in welcoming Lauren Steiner.
Thank you, Brittany, and thanks to the whole Carey Center community and everybody who's joining. Thanks also to the Walker Area Community Foundation for sponsoring the series. I'm so happy to be here. This topic that we're talking about, the hidden research that funders are doing on you, is a newer one for me, although it's a topic that I've been thinking about and working in for a really long time. So I want to say that, what do we mean by the hidden research? Well, it's not hidden to them, it's hidden to you. And so it's sort of trying to figure out what program officers and foundations are seeing about you as organizations and how we can kind of get ahead of the curve a little bit. So let's proceed. I will start with just a brief thank you, Brittany, for the introduction about Grants Plus. Yes, we've almost 20 years in business. We have 35 full-time staff members. As Brittany said, we are a national consulting firm, about 450 million secured for our clients and about over 500 clients served. And just to say that, we're embracing AI. It's part of all of our fields. It's changing everything that we do, and I'm excited and here for it in ways that I think that it can improve our ability to do more with less. So it is wonderful. Okay, let's keep going. Let's do a roadmap here. This is what we're going to cover today. We will start with the assumptions that people make about what funders know and where that knowledge comes from. Then we will break out kind of the full picture, thinking strategically about what a funder can actually see and learn about your organization, both from the perspective of the direct communications between you and the funder, your organization and the funder, and then what we call more of the ambient presence, all those sort of mass communications, or what marketing people say, one-to-many communications. From there, we will dig into the signals that are actually what those signals are actually communicating to your funders. And we're going to spend some time on why honesty matters more than polish, and why being consistent across your direct communications and your more ambient communications can actually help build that funder confidence. And so we'll close with just some of my ideas on an audit that you can take of your various communications, and hopefully some practical suggestions for things that you can do to make sure that those things are in alignment quickly. And then there'll be time for questions at the end. But as Brittany and I spoke about in the beginning, if there are questions throughout, I'm really happy to take them. If you can't tell by now, or if you've ever heard me speak before, or if you can't tell by now, I'm really passionate about grants and grant seeking. And, there's no dumb question. I'm happy to answer anything. And if you have a question that's very specific to your organization, I'll offer that my contact info is listed at the end. And I'm always happy to talk offline if it's something that's more specific to your organization. So let's start with the assumption that I think most development professionals are working from. And that is, if I asked you now, where does a funder's knowledge of your organization come from? What would you say? And I think for most people in the field, it looks something like this: our proposals, our reports, and our meetings. Maybe a site visit or something if the relationship has progressed that far. But the challenge that I want to put out there is that I think that's an incomplete model. There is a gap between what organizations assume and what is actually happening, or where trust gets built, and I think, or lost, actually, where trust can get built or lost. And I think that that is happening without anyone realizing it. So here's a contrast. On the left side is what organizations think funders are seeing. That's like their proposal, their sort of neatly curated content. And then on the right side is the full picture of what funders are seeing. And that includes your website, your 990, your media coverage, your press, your presence, your reputation, all of these things, your job postings, board affiliations, staff LinkedIn profiles, the list goes on. And none of those things on the right are anything that you sent the funder. If you're astute, you can see I've got little red flags throughout this because it could be red flags, who knows? But none of those things are things you sent the funder, but they're all out there and visible for a funder who looks for them. So it's not I'm not meaning this in a way like to make you very anxious about things, but it's just an invitation to start to think maybe a little more strategically about the breadth of your organizational presence, and not just those documents that we so carefully curate for our funders. So let's walk through everything in the picture. We want to look at them methodically and then specifically. And again, in the two categories. The first category being that direct communication, and the second being that ambient communication. So direct communications, we are managing closely. We all know this. Proposals, letters of inquiry or LOIs, grant reports, the pre-proposal phone call, your update calls, check in. I don't need to go on. You know what those are. The ambient communications are the ones that you're not thinking of often as funder communications. Your website, your social media, your 990s, your job postings, all of those things. Even your staff's LinkedIn profiles. The critical thing to understand is that funders are consulting both of these categories. And in my experience, that ambient category is the place where most organizations are caught off guard that something got around or got back to a funder that they were hoping didn't, or something like that. So let's start on the easy side. We'll start with the direct communications, because even though they're very direct, there's often more happening than sort of meets the eye. So your proposals and your LOIs, I think everybody knows this. It's more than just a request for funding. It's a record of a moment in time. Funders can refer back to them. I've seen this happen before. You say, this is always a big one. You say, like, next, in order to meet this budget, we're going to be beefing up our individual giving line. Well, if you've said that for the last 5 years, a funder has every right to go back and say, well, you said this for a long time, but where are the results, right? So it is a record, but it's also part of that trust building equation that can happen. And so if there's inconsistencies between, let's say, your proposal and your report, that can become part of that institutional memory of the relationship that exists. Um, I want to talk about pre-proposal phone calls. This is something that I will scream from the mountaintops. And if you've ever heard me speak before, I'm sure you've heard me talk about this. It's undervalued. Funders are forming an opinion about you, and a view of how clear you articulate what you need in the very first few minutes of that kind of conversation. So how well you articulate the work, how responsive are you to the questions, how prepared are you for those phone calls, is something that will last, something that will linger for you. And we absolutely recommend that you are connecting with your funders ahead of submitting proposals. Always, every time, unless the funder says, like, no, we don't need to do this, we almost always recommend that kind of thing happening. Um, update calls and site visits, those can reveal lots of things about your organization. I'm thinking specifically of site visits, but like, how does your organization not just write about the work, but talk about the work that you're doing? How does the leadership engage? Are there board members present? Are they actually present? Or are they just sort of physically present? Is it all the executive director and no staff participation? Something else interesting that can happen in site visits is when something goes off plan, when there's a child, a client at a site visit and they say something that nobody planned, like when something goes off the rails in some kind of way, how do you handle that? Those are really important kind of like intangible ways of direct communication. And then there's the stewardship conversations. And when I talk about institutional funding stewardship, some people think that means your required reports, which is definitely a part of it, but not all of it. Um, how do you cultivate that relationship with the funder so that demonstrates how much they matter to you? A funder who never hears from you between cycles, they're going to notice that. So this is, broadly to say that every direct touch point, and maybe it goes without saying, every direct touch point that you have with your institutional funders matter. They're taking notes. They're collecting this real, like physically or just anecdotally. And every interaction that they have with your organization matters. So that's the direct side of the equation. And now let's go into the more ambient category. Um, Two sources that I would say 99.9% of program officers are going to look at or check will be your website and your 990. So your website, that communicates lots of things. Mission clarity, program depth, program breadth, it staff stability, even just organizational energy, if you could call it that. And today, websites are so much just a part of the landscape, right? It's just part of the water of this ocean that we exist in nonprofit, in the nonprofit sector. But funders who are visiting your website, whether it's for the first time or for the 20th time, they're getting some kind of impression about your organization because of the choices you've made in highlighting what you're highlighting. So we've all been to those sites where you look and you know it hasn't been updated in 2 years because the annual report that's on there is at least 2 or 3 years old. And it just demonstrates that your content is stale and that perhaps you're not paying attention to that facet of your communications. So it could indicate that you're overstretched or that you haven't had consistent help in marketing or something like that. But it could indicate, from a funder's perspective, that you bite off more than you can chew. And that is not an impression that we ever want to give our institutional funders because it doesn't bode well for the trust building that's required for them to believe that you're a good financial investment. And it raises questions about the organization that have nothing to do with the proposal that you've put in front of them. So now let's go to the 990. And everyone knows that's the tax document that nonprofits file and their public information. And I do think there's a pretty big knowledge gap here. And that is, of course, it's a public document. It's available to anyone on lots of places like ProPublica and Candid or directly from the IRS. And funders can look at that and make an impression in 2 minutes flat. Most funders know how to read a 990. And so they're getting a narrative about your organization that you likely never wrote for them at all. They can see revenue and expense. They can see trends, surplus or deficit. They see what kind of endowment you have, whether you have an endowment. They see leadership comp. They see board composition. They see how much of your budget reaches the programs and how much is allocated to administration and how concentrated your revenue sources are. And just, I will go in later into guidance on some of this, but to say there's not one right thing or wrong thing. I think people always want to know from me, like, what's the right administrative overhead to have? What do funders think about endowments, things like that? It's going to be different across the board, but just the knowledge that this document, your 990, is telling a story. Do you know what story that is? And are there any things in there? We're going to get to the this a little bit later, but are there any things in that document that require a bit more explanation? And if so, are there places in the 990 where you can include that explanation so you don't have to be on hand to explain it? Or could you get ahead of it by explaining some of that stuff in your proposal documents or in your conversations with funders? So I think the nutshell here is most organizations don't read their 990s from the lens of their funders. And I think it's worth taking a look at that maybe before your next proposal goes out. If it's due tomorrow, before the next proposal goes out. Okay, so let's keep moving through the ambient landscape. Social media is where I think the one of the biggest places where your organizational values show up, because what you're choosing to focus on in social media is what you're focusing on in the public sphere. And does that align with your mission driven organization? And does that align with how you present yourself in your proposals? Because funders who follow nonprofits in their portfolio, they can tell when something feels off. I will give an example here really quick. That is an organization I was working with, working really hard to court a specific funder about an initiative they were working on. And it was led by the president of it was a school. It was led by the president of the school. Maybe I'm getting the title wrong. It wasn't the principal, but I think it was the president and of a private school. And then all of a sudden there was a social media post that said he was moving on to another job. And I caught it right away and said, like, did we get in touch with the funder ahead of time? Because that would have been really key. He was so key to that proposal. He was the one that sold it to them. He was the one that met with them, all of that stuff. And then all of a sudden, there's a note on social media that he's leaving, and we've never looped the funder into that. So that's just one example. Media and press coverage provides a super valuable message about your organization because it's that third party validation. So if you are able to get a positive piece in media or press, that can, depending on where it comes from, obviously, but that can really engender some positive thoughts from the funder, like, wow, they're doing really great things before they've ever talked to you or read a single word in your proposal. And another story, there's an organization in Florida that was trying to get in front of some major donors in the country, and they hired a PR firm and got some really great press, including, I want to say it could have been Harvard Business Review. I'm not really sure, but it was a national publication. And very shortly after that, they were in the first tranche of the Mackenzie Scott gifts. And the only thing that they could attribute it to was that PR effort, because otherwise they don't know how they got on her radar. And I thought that was a pretty phenomenal story about press. And the other thing is then it can go conversely, because what are they going to find if they search your name? So they are going to likely Google your organization's name, and what are they going to find? Are there, and sometimes this is the case and you can't control this, there may be negative press out there for some reason. So we just want to make sure, if that is the case, that we're always getting ahead of it and not acting like something didn't happen, or because we know that's an event that's in the past, assuming that they also know that that's an event that's in the past. One of the least, I think, acknowledged pieces of this ambient communication would be job postings. I don't think that we think that our funders are paying attention to that, but trust me, they are. When there's frequent turnover and they've seen this development director position up for 3 times in the last 2 years, that is something that can send a signal. So are we talking with our funders about that or getting ahead of that? And then the last one that I will offer is Glassdoor. And if you don't know what that is, that's a place where employees can review their employers, and it's publicly accessible. And so just to assume that funders could look at that too. And if there's a consistent pattern of like workplace concerns, or there's some sort of trend, we just want to make sure that if that's out there in the public, that we're able to deal with it or explain what is going on as we're dealing with that. And those are things that can surface, like I said, during the due diligence or just throughout the year with a funder, that can be really difficult to address if the only way you're communicating with a funder is through a proposal, and or if you don't even know that's out there. The last piece of the ambient picture that I will describe is that peer network or your sector reputation. And so this is just to say that funders talk to each other. I think we all know that. They attend the same convenings, they serve on panels together, they participate in professional networks. And I will say this from experience, lots of times those professional networks are closed to us as grant seekers. So they really are these kind of, I don't want to say secret clubs, but they are these kind of closed door type things. So they're able to have frank conversations with each other. And trust me, a program officer will ask another program officer, what's your experience with this organization? And that conversation, especially if that's a trusted relationship between those two, really can shape how everything that you provide as far as direct communication is read. So a warm word from a trusted colleague can mean sometimes more than everything that's in your proposal. And the inverse can also be true. And then this is where staff visibility matters. So if you have senior staff at your organization that are active in the sector, they're presenting at conferences, they're publishing, they're participating in their professional associations, that itself can build some credibility. And then the same with board affiliations. Who's on your board? What other affiliations do they have? It can all signal how serious you look at your governance of your organization. And then the last facet would be leadership visibility. So if you, as an executive director, are known in your field as a thought leader, as a respected practitioner, that can transfer heavily to your organization. And I'll offer you two frames. So let's say we have an executive director of a of a site center or something like that. So that person, if they're viewed as kind of the leader of this organization, that's one thing. If they're viewed as a champion for the people served by this organization, and by the way they accomplish that championship is through leading the organization, that's kind of a whole different ball game. So think about that. How is your leadership positioning themselves? Are they just the leader of this organization, or are they a champion for this cause? And the way they champion this cause is by leading this organization. All right. So let's look at what these signals are actually communicating. We walk through the landscape, everything a funder can see and learn about your organization, but how does that translate into what are they drawing from those messages? And I want to say one more thing about this, and that is the relationship. When we say relationships with a funder, that's like a many legged stool or like an octopus, right? There's so many relationships that exist between an organization and the grant funder because there's the program officer and the development director, there's the executive director and the CEO of the foundation. There's so many, it's a tangled web. But the key relationship that I'm talking about here is the relationship that exists between the two entities. So the organization that you represent and the foundation, the organizational relationship that exists between the two. Now, it's accomplished through people. We all understand that. And it can change because of people. But this relationship between the two entities is the one that's going to endure. It's the one that's going to last for the long time because people come and go. But the organization and the funder could have a relationship for the lifetime of both of those entities. So I just want to sort of ground us in what we're actually talking about when we talk about a relationship. So let's look at what a funder can learn from your 990. And this is one of the sources of information that can surprise people the most. So in the first column, you can see what is in the 990. So we all know revenue and expense history, surplus deficits, exec comp, board comp, all of those things, staff headcount trends, revenue diversification, all of that stuff. And then in the middle, we are looking at what a funder can learn from each of those data points. So they can tell whether you're growing or contracting. They can tell how dependent you are on, let's say, government funding or one single funding source. They can tell what your leadership comp is, how aligned that or not aligned that is with your organizational scale. They can tell how much of your budget actually reaches programs. And then in the third column, that is what that sort of signals at the relationship level. And that can tell them whether your organization is a credible partner, let's say for a multi-year investment, whether your financial trends are suggesting a stable organization or a financially stressed organization. So I say that the 990 is the narrative we've never written because it's written generally by accountants or accountants for your organization. Um, and it's being read by people who are making decisions whether or not to fund you. So that's really a document that's worth sitting with. And so here's a practical implication. Every development professional should read their organization's most recent 990 before the proposal goes out and ask themselves honestly, what story is this document telling someone who doesn't already know us? And if it's raising any questions, how are we addressing those questions in our direct funder communication channels? So I always say this, and this goes whether it's we're talking about a proposal or any funder communication. Don't leave it to the funder to draw their own conclusions. I always say, don't leave it to chance. If your 990 raises any questions that you think could impact trust, get ahead of them and provide the context or the answers before they even ask the questions. And the best example I could think of here is around the endowment. So if your 990 is showing that you have a healthy endowment year after year, but you never talk about that in your proposals or in your conversations, I think that's a miss. And there could be a host of other things that your 990 could be saying without saying anything. But if you're reading it, deficit is another one. Like we had this wild deficit 1 year, but we don't ever talk about that. Like, I think that's a miss as well. We want to make sure that we talk about it. The other thing I always hear is, well, we didn't get a question about it, but we don't want to wait for that. We don't want to wait for a question. If we want to find a place in the 500 character count answers. We want to find the right place to put that answer. And if it's not in the proposal, it should be in the conversations around the proposal. All right. So now let's do that same exercise that we just did with the 990, and we'll talk about the website. I talked about mission and program clarity, and I do think that's something that a funder would assess if they visit your site. If they can't very quickly understand what it is you do, who you serve, they may question whether your staff can articulate it at all. And so if a website is confusing, think that it could produce confusion in a funder's mind. And then the staff and leadership pages. You know, trust comes down to people, and people lead organizations, and funders want to know who's leading this organization. Another thing is, do you have your staff's tenure on the website? Because that could be important too. How long have they been with the organization? And let's say they haven't been with the organization long. How long have they been in this field? Those are things that can engender trust in an organization. And does the way that you present your team on your website match up with how you present them in conversations and in your proposal? Another signal, especially on a website, is your news and recent activity. And I talked about this before. If the last news article or annual report you have up there is from 2022, regardless of how strong your other communications are, this is an indication that you're not paying attention to something very closely. And so we just want to know that that is out there. And I totally understand staff is stretched, marketing budgets are cut, all of those things. And if that's something that you're facing, maybe that's something to get ahead of, or even take the news section off of your website so it doesn't look like you're not updating something. Another thing is that consistency is critical. So, if your website describe, like I've heard this before, this is our flagship program, but let's say your website is describing it differently than the way you've described it in a proposal. All I want to say is you just want to call that out in some kind of way so that, assuming funders are doing some research outside of your direct communication, that it all aligns and that it's not generating any questions. Because the truth is that if something is inconsistent, it can create doubt. And even if both of the descriptions are actually accurate, It's the disconnect that can be unsettling for funders, for anyone. Um, and then the last bit is the choices that you make. So organizations sometimes publish their annual reports, or something akin to an annual report on their website that shows their income and expense and their numbers and all of that stuff. And I do think that the organizations that choose to do that are signaling something, and that is that they believe in transparency and that they are confident in their numbers. So it is a choice to put that out there, and just know that I do think that choice shows a level of transparency that can help engender trust and earn you some credibility. But you do want to make sure, as much as you can, that the latest information is actually out there. So I wanted to share this piece because this is one of those things where I've just heard it throughout my career, that program officers talk to each other. They attend conferences, as I said, they serve on panels, they know each other. When someone asks whether a funder should, what should I do with this organization, they're going to share what they think. They do, like I said, operate in these kind of closed spaces. And that is the opportunity, frankly, for your organization to be championed by a complete third party. And that is worth its weight in gold. So if you know what your organization's reputation is out there, or you don't know, I would recommend, maybe if you don't know, ask. And ask for as honest a share as you can get. And I would say maybe from your like top funder or two. That will help you so much to know kind of like what you have in your corner, or potentially what you are up against. And then we, how do I want to say this? Organizations that get championed, let's say, in those behind the door conversations, it's not because of they wrote a great proposal. Everybody knows that. Like there's so many facets that get an organization to that coveted space. And I believe fully that the way organizations get there is through consistency and honest communication and transparency with their funders. And they demonstrate that they believe in that relationship between the two institutions, and not thinking of a funder as an ATM or a transactional relationship. It's a true give and take relationship built on honesty. So your reputation, we know it's built over time, and it's built through many channels. And many of those channels are visible to those people who are making critical decisions about our organizations. So everything we've talked about in this presentation is sort of boiled down to one thing. And I'm actually working on a book right now about relationships between funders and grantees. And trust is like this cornerstone. Um, they're evaluating in any of their interactions with us whether they can trust us as grantees to be good stewards of their investment in us. And so every single channel that we walked through, the websites, the 990s, the social media, the peer conversations, the proposals, the reports, is doing one of the other thing. It's either building trust or it's eroding trust. And so next we're going to go into something that's a little more of a framework to try to see what is happening in each of those channels, and making sure, hopefully, that we're building trust and that we're not eroding trust. So the first thought, I mentioned it before, is consistency. When your story as an organization holds together, that means your proposals, your websites, your 990s, your conversations, they're all jiving with each other. They're saying the same thing and they're describing the same organization. Your funders feel confident because they're not left to reconcile something that doesn't add up or something that's conflicting. They don't have to wonder, like, which is the accurate thing, what I read in the proposal or what I read on the website, because every source that they go to or are given is confirming the same picture. And that kind of consistency can compound itself over time, because funders that have worked with you across multiple cycles, and I absolutely know that many of you on this call have that kind of a background. You have an organization that has been funded by these funders over and over and over again. Those funders can start to find you coherent, can be reliable funders for you, and they can be your champions in those closed door meetings. They can start to renew you without prompting. I've heard of this. It's like legendary, like the Loch Ness monster. Like, oh, we just had a conversation and they said, yes, we don't need to submit a proposal. Beautiful. Love that. Or they could give you the multi-year support or the general operating support because you've built that trust over with consistency over time. And they will also, by the way, give you benefit of the doubt when something comes up because it inevitably will. On the flip side of that, when that story is contradictory, the effect can be opposite. Because if your 990 is showing 3 years of deficits and your proposal is talking about how this organization is growing wildly, or your staff that are listed in your application are already gone, that can engender that can seed doubt in a funder's mind. And this is something that I think is super important to talk about. Funders that encounter contradictions, whatever they may be, they don't always call you and ask about it because sometimes it's not even like significant enough in the beginning to warrant a conversation. So it could be something small doesn't match up. And then something that they heard over here, and then something that they read on the website. So it's not a red flag yet, but it's just a moment of like, what the heck is going on? And so those moments can start to accumulate. And then the next time they look at something direct from your organization, they feel a little more skeptical, a little less confident. And then all of a sudden, a third thing adds to it, and they start to feel like it's a pattern of some kind. So, again, you may never hear about this from a funder, but it could be present, and it's this slow erosion of trust before you even know what's happening. We have a question, so let's take it. Kelly.
Thank you, Lauren. Question about this. So 990s are always a little, or like I mean, at least ours are always kind of like a year old. And
Uh-huh.
so they sometimes look different than, what the situation is at the time I'm writing a grant
Mhm.
and or what I'm proposing and, budgeting into the future. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Kelly. Thank you for asking it. You're right. There's a lag. There's a time lag. I think that the best way to do that is just to get in front of it. So when you're having your conversations, hopefully before you're submitting a proposal with your funder, you want to bring it up and talk about it. The other thing is if it really is sort of raising a question, let's say there's been a deficit, but you're projecting growth or whatever it is, this probably makes sense. You probably have sound and solid plans, but you want to make sure that you express that and name it expressly. I think that's it. I think we're just advising to not leave it to chance or leave it to a funder interpretation without us being present. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, so I think, we're not getting a phone call likely. Maybe we are, and if you are, you have a good relationship with your funders. But we're not getting a phone call from a funder that says, "Hey, I just wanted you to know that on your website there's a program that you describe differently than you do in your proposal." You may just notice a funder sort of pushing away or giving some distance, or you expected a renewal and then it never happened, something like that. But I just recommend getting ahead of it. Consistency is not the same thing as perfection across all channels. I think funders absolutely know that it's humans running human organizations. We're just looking for, or funders, I believe, are looking for organizations where their story holds together across the sources and across the people that they talk to. And so when it does, that trust, like I said, can compound. And when it doesn't, the doubt, unfortunately, can compound. So this is a slide. If you remember nothing from this presentation, I think this would be the slide I would want you to remember, which is that honesty builds a more durable trust than polish ever will. There is a tendency in my field of grants to present everything in the most positive possible light. And, I see this all the time. Outcomes exceeded our expectation. Our staff are thriving. Our programs are all on track. Our partners are so engaged. Everything is just going so well. And I just want to say that, be wary of that because I think your funders are wary of that. Not because they're cynical people, but because they've been doing this, many of them have been doing this long enough to know that programs often don't go as planned. Challenges happen. The last 6 years is a huge testament to the challenges that happen. Our field is extremely complicated. Um, they know that organizations that are presenting a picture that is uniformly rosy are either outrageously lucky or they're managing an image. And most likely I believe they will think that you're managing to an image. And so I have seen organizations that have developed real strong relationships with our funders, and they're the ones who are saying the hard truth. They're saying, we had this program, we anticipated it was going to do this, and we did not hit our participation targets. And this is what happened. This is what we learned. This is what we're doing going forward. I think that itself, or what some version of that, is one of the most powerful trust building communications that you can have with a funder. And I think many are still afraid to do that because they're afraid to risk that investment in the future. But if we are brave enough to acknowledge that we have had challenges, that we've had to pivot our programs in some ways, that we've had lessons learned, that we're still assessing what those lessons are, that does not signal a weakness. It signals the maturity, the self-awareness, and a real commitment to continuously improving your work. And those things are qualities that I believe funders look for in their long-term partners. So one thing I do want to take another aside. I can't take the grant practitioner out of me. Before we talk about reports, I want to name something that I think that sometimes comes as a surprise to people when I talk about stewardship. So uh, w- oh, where I want to go with this. Two things about reporting. One is I believe in grant reports whether or not they require reports. And it doesn't have to be an 18-page report with statistics and trends or anything like that. But using that report vehicle as a way to steward the next gifts from a funder makes good sense. And by the way, another thing about stewardship, and I call those courtesy reports, by the way, and I think you should do them across the board. I understand people are limited in time, so maybe you just take your top funders and do them, but those are really, really valuable. But another thing is the funder communications that exist that we call stewardship. And sometimes I hear from grantees and they say, well, our funders are on our list for the gala, or our funders they're getting our newsletter, right? And so we think that those are touch points, but those are very, very arm's length touch points. And it is such a meaningful difference if you send your newsletter with a note that says, Dear Betsy, thank you again for the grant. The program that you funded is highlighted in this month's newsletter, and I wanted to make sure that you saw it. Thank you again. Whatever you're going to say, and sign it from a person. That is such a different communication than just blasting off an e-newsletter and hoping that a funder reads it. Likewise, if you're inviting your funders to your gala, which I know can be kind of a sticky wicket because of funding and whatever, but many organizations do. And or let's just say not a gala, but let's say some type of event. You're inviting them to some type of a community event. Just an email invitation, or I don't know if we're still doing handwritten, just an invitation, uh, printed. If we're just sending an invitation with no personal note, you can pretty much consider that a non-event. But putting a note on it that says, we would love to see you here because we're going to be talking about the things that I know that you care about. Something like that means makes such a big difference. So those are those sort of personal touch points. Okay, now I'll get aside. Now I'll get back. The distinction there is just the individualization. It's important for your funders to see your organization as partners. And for that, you do need to have those interpersonal relationships. They're not an entry in your database or a ranked number funder. They are a person who cares about the organization, and they do that through their work with the foundation. So in my experience, many organizations are not doing those things. They're not doing courtesy reporting. They're not doing one-to-one individual communications with their funders outside of that gift transaction. And that is what we mean by stewardship. And that is really, really important. Okay, back to the regularly scheduled program. So let's bring that into practice. Grant reports are some of that high leverage trust building things that can happen. And I do think that most organizations treat those as like a compliance task, like check the box, we must complete this thing. Um, the it leaves a lot on the table. And a report that reads more like a press release, where again, you're not very honest about what's happening. You're just sort of managing an image. Here's what we set out to do. Here's what happened. Here's what we learned. If you really sort of follow that and you're honest with that, it tells funders that you are managing a program that's living, that's breathing, that difference can be very significant. Another thing to think about though are those update calls. Like, I don't know if it has to be a phone call, could be an email, could be a phone call, but just that just says like, hey, this is going on today, and I was thinking of you. Or I read this article about this topic that we both care about so much. I used to work for an organization that worked with children with autism, and I would send articles that came out about autism to the funders because I would say, hey, I didn't know if you saw this, but this just came out and we're looking at it really carefully. Those kinds of things matter a lot. So I love the brief personal notes that happen. It could be when your program hits some kind of a milestone. It could be when you've gotten some press coverage for the program. It could be a data point. We just had our 100th participant. I don't know what the things are. There could be a multitude of things. We used to have the same organization that served children with autism. We had a preschool for kids with autism, and we had all this artwork. We would line the hallways with it. And I had kind of my low to mid level foundation donors, and some of them were local, small family foundations. And I would, with the parents' permission, take the artwork that they didn't want to take home, and I would take it to our foundation donors. And I would buy, a decently cheap frame and just say like, hey, thought you might like this in your office. Trust me, they like that way better than the engraved glass pieces that they get at some award ceremony that doesn't mean anything to them. The kids' artwork meant so much. And you may have something like that, very easy to do, very low cost, but high reward. So I think just to say, and I also want to say this, someone challenged me on something the other day about like, aren't you manipulating people? And I don't think of it as manipulation. I think of it as sort of using the tools that we have in our toolbox to help us build authentic and accurate and real relationships with people that are helping accomplish an amazing community good, or you wouldn't be working for the organization that you're working for. But I love, we can even get a conversation going on that. I think it's an interesting topic to think about. So I spent a lot of time already talking about like what's the situation and what is going on. But let's talk about some action. So I always want my stuff to be very practical, and I brought together a bit of a framework for thinking about how you could audit your organization presence through the lens of what your funders are seeing, and maybe identifying what some of your opportunities are. So it's 4 steps. And hopefully, again, as realistic and as practical as possible. So, step 1, do some type of an audit. Google your organization's name. or search it through ChatGPT or your favorite AI program. Read your most recent 990 as if you were a program officer, maybe someone who hasn't heard of you before. Go to your website and look at it with that same kind of lens and think about what someone who doesn't already know who you are, what are they seeing? What questions does your 990 raise? What story is your website telling to someone who's a stranger to the organization? And then step two, when you do that audit, look for the gaps in consistency. Where does your external messaging not match the current reality for your organization? Are there old programs listed on your site or something that's not been updated lately? Um, are there staff changes that haven't been updated on the site? A really big one, we've already talked about it a couple of times, but the financial trends in your 990, are they telling a different story than the one that you're telling to your funders? And so you're looking for places where there's information that doesn't agree with itself on the different channels. And this is 100% where funders can, confidence in your organization can start to erode. So these are areas maybe where we can make some changes. And then step three, evaluate your funder facing communications, those direct communications that you have with your funders for honesty. When was the last time your grant report or your call with a funder or something, when you acknowledge something did not go as planned, are you having those real conversations with your funders, or are you presenting to a carefully curated, managed image of your organization that you think is what they actually want to see? I think that this can be sometimes one of the hardest hurdles to overcome if you're in the camp that has always presented a positive, um, perfect front. But I do think that if you start to work on this and work on some honesty and transparency, that this is one of those facets of this work that can reap the biggest returns. And then the last step is to figure out what is within your control and act. Look and see if there's some low-hanging fruit that you can fix up this week, like a website update or starting to align your proposal language with program descriptions that are current, um, searching your organization's name, making these small tweaks. And then others might require a sustained effort over time. That could be, how are you addressing financial deficits or your endowment or something like that? That may require many people to weigh in on how you're going to present this to your funders. But I think if you look at where you can make quick changes and where you have sort of a little bit more work to do, that can at least give you a good place to start. So again, not everything's going to be quickly fixable, but I don't want you to leave today feeling completely overwhelmed. So let's look at what you can do quickly and what might take more effort. Quick things like updating the website, again, looking at that 990, aligning your program language in both your proposals and your program descriptions, introducing some honesty into your grant reports, Googling your name, ChatGPTing your name, seeing what comes up, reviewing your staff's LinkedIn profiles, just making sure that they're consistent. And then again, none of these require sort of a major investment of time or resources, but they do require some intention and a through line. And then there's those things that may take a little bit longer. So I've seen this many, many times, but organizations have missed deliverables or screwed up a grant report or screwed up a timeline or something like that, and they've got like work to do to rebuild a relationship with a funder. So that can take some time. Improving your employer's reputation through Glassdoor. Maybe you've got a significant number of hits on, that it's I've seen everything. Like it's a toxic place to work, and we've got 5 people that listed this on Glassdoor. I would say that's worth some investigation and to try to figure out what you can do. I know that some things that you can do, I've heard on Glassdoor, is that you can, I think, ask current employees to post. So maybe it's not all that accurate, but it was just like one really angry past employee or something. So there's things that can be done, I guess, is the point. Um, but it may take some time. You know, building your sector visibility. I think lots of times we talked a bit about that earned media, the articles and things like that. I think those things can take a lot of time to develop. And maybe those are things that you could just get started on. So this part of this could be a long game. Part of this could be some things that you can do a little bit more quickly. But just I want to close with this last bit, and then we do have just a couple minutes for questions. But funders are evaluating whether your organization is trustworthy of their investment, and it happens in more than just your proposal. Um, it's every time they encounter your organization, whether that's on a conversation online, through a peer, in a search result, so many ways. And so everything, it's just, I think, the acknowledgement that everything you communicate, intentionally or otherwise, can contribute to their judgment of you. And organizations that understand this and treat their organizational presence as communication channels to the people that they're hoping to build positive relationships with are those that can build funder relationships that can truly last the test of time. So thank you for spending this time with me today, and I'm really happy to answer questions. They can be general about grant seeking or about the topic that we talked about today. And then my contact information. Feel free to use it. Anything?
You are welcome to unmute, type it in the chat, anything you would like to do or share with Lauren.
I can make a couple of notes, but please interrupt me. One is small organizations. I see you. You are doing all the things. There are so many channels of potential communication. And so I would say if you had to prioritize all of those things, focus on your 990. What message is that telling? Really get into that because that is kind of a baseline, I think, for fund that funders look at.
Lauren, thank you so much for that inspiring program today. For everyone joining us, keep an eye out for an email from me. It'll have a link to the presentation and recording and an opportunity to sign up as a Carey Center nonprofit affiliate if you are not already one. Our nonprofit affiliate program now serves more than 485 nonprofits across Alabama and beyond, and it's a great way to access educational programs, professional development, and networking opportunities, and membership is completely free. The Carey Center Nonprofit Consultant Directory connects nonprofits with trusted experts in areas such as fundraising, board development, marketing, and strategic planning. Whether you're launching something new or solving a challenge, you can find experienced partners ready to help move your mission forward. Explore the directory and take your organization to the next level. We are also excited to share information about the Carey Center Nonprofit Professional Certificate. This is an online, non-degreed certificate developed in partnership with the Auburn University Office of Professional and Continuing Education and Merit Nonprofit Professional Development. Merit is an anytime, anywhere micro-learning platform that helps nonprofit professionals strengthen 6 key areas, including leading, learning, resource generating, planning, managing, and overseeing. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you at one of our monthly virtual programs or in person when our nonprofit training series comes to your part of the state. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.